Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. My name is Julie Mock. I'm the Conservation Director for CMC. I'm excited to talk to you just about some of the programs that we run out of the Conservation Department, particularly some of the projects and programs we've got going on the West Slope. But really this is just a conversation and a discussion for you all, and an opportunity to ask questions and find out about what we're doing, and of course, you know, express any issues or items or conservation related topics that you might be aware of that we're not working on yet, and talk about those as well. So I think we've got a small group, and so feel free to kind of jump in at any point really, and ask questions and stop me at any point if I start talking too quickly, that sort of thing. But I wanted to just start out with kind of a quick overview of the Conservation Department and kind of how we're staffed at the state level. Most of our staff is actually based in Salida. We've got one staff person down in Del Norte, and then we also hire seasonal folks that work around the state. But primarily our programming falls into two or maybe three big buckets. The biggest one being stewardship, and I'll talk about the trail crews and programs that we run on that side of things. And then we also do a lot of advocacy work, land management planning, a little bit of policy and legislative work. That primarily falls kind of in my realm. And then most of our other staff are working on stewardship projects. We do also have the new Recreation Impact Monitoring System, our RIMS mobile app, and I'll talk about that specifically. That kind of overlaps with our stewardship programming a fair amount. So, but yeah, if you, again, I haven't met many of you in person, but we've also got Brink, who's here in Salida, Connor's based in Salida as well, and then Todd's down in Del Norte. So I'll touch on our stewardship programs first. For those that don't know, we do run seasonal trail crews every summer. This year we've got one crew of 3 individuals, and they're working statewide on trail maintenance projects, new construction projects. They'll do some habitat and restoration work. This year they're doing a lot of what we call cut and run work. So they're often working in remote areas, a lot of time wilderness areas. So they're using crosscut saws or chainsaws to clear trails and do basic trail maintenance work kind of while they're moving. But because they're a smaller crew, they tend to be just a little bit faster and more mobile and agile, and able to cover more ground than, say, a bigger conservation corps crew or a big volunteer crew. So they can cover a lot of mileage, log out a lot of trees, and yeah, get a fair amount of work done on both forest and BLM across the state. We do not have them over on the West Slope much this year, but in the past we've done work on the Ouray Ranger District, some work kind of in the Gunnison area and Lake City area with the BLM. We did a project out of Palisade a couple of years ago. We actually partnered with Great Old Broads for Wilderness and did some trail maintenance over there. And we're always looking for, additional projects and work for those guys, again, all over the state. So as you guys are out seeing things, if you ever come across a project that could use more work, feel free to let me know, and we can work with the land managers to find funding and kind of develop resources to get them out on the ground. We also do a lot of design build work. So Brink, who I mentioned, and Todd have both been doing trails work for decades. And so we actually will partner with the agencies to do trail design for new construction projects, and then supervision to oversee not only our crews, but other volunteer groups or conservation corps crews and that sort of thing. A lot of that has taken place kind of in the Salida and Buena Vista area recently, and then down in the San Luis Valley. And then kind of the last component of our stewardship program, which is a little bit newer, is some wilderness monitoring work that we've been doing. This is out of the Gunnison Ranger District this year. We have an individual placement, so just a kind of a single crew member who's helping with wilderness monitoring, specifically looking at the development of social trails in the Powderhorn Wilderness and the Fossil Ridge Wilderness. So he's, you know, again, with a lot of our field programs, he's getting paid to go out and hike around in beautiful areas in Colorado and collect data and provide that to the Forest Service so that they can basically come up with a plan to close and restore those social trails or user-created trails. So, you know, a lot of opportunities. Normally we've got also some volunteer opportunities for members to kind of engage in stewardship. That's been, you know, it's a little bit different this year with COVID, but usually we do kind of one or two bigger volunteer projects. But then again, we work with partners like Volunteers for Outdoor Colorado or Colorado Trail Foundation who do a lot more of that volunteer-based trail work. That was a quick recap. Any major questions on our stewardship program?
I have a couple of questions. In Ouray County, there's been a big problem with visitors, you know, driving over tundra and stuff like that. Is that something that a wilderness monitoring type person would handle? Educate people?
Yeah, definitely with potentially with education and with kind of tracking that. You know, I think it's a hard issue to deal with unless, you know, you're able to kind of fence and close those areas off to kind of prevent it from happening. Right. But I think from a user education standpoint, that's, yeah, potentially something that you know, a wilderness steward would be able to do. And, you know, just even having that presence of someone who knows the regulations and can talk to people about it. Right now, our wilderness steward in Gunnison isn't doing a ton of public outreach, and that he's not certified to do any enforcement or write tickets. But that is something that we have had staff trained to do in the past.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So Julie, I'd like to add in about the RIMS system that you're going to be talking about, and that app that Colorado Mountain Club has, so that, you know, you know, there's only so many people that are rangers and monitors. What about all the trip leaders and everybody's on a hike? And so you see that, and I think it's a great segue for talking about how RIMS is going to provide opportunities for everybody that has a phone, basically, to report on those and go directly to all the land managers. So
yeah, and we'll talk about that in detail. But yeah, as far as the kind of reporting of infractions or people driving off road and that sort of things, RIMS is a great tool to be able to provide that information and be able to, you know, document the resource damage that's occurring from it. So even if you don't see the individual person driving off-road, but you can see the tracks starting to develop or that sort of thing, you can report that as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions on stewardship specifically?
Yeah. Okay, so just how you said let you know about projects. How can we impact stewardship projects? You said let you know. How's the best way to do that? And do you want it first as like us go through some kind of group process, or do we just as individuals contact you? I mean, what's the sort of protocol, the way that we should work with you, understanding that you're getting tugged and pulled from all different directions?
Sure.
How can we most effectively get to you without, you know, driving you nuts?
Yeah, totally. I appreciate that question. You know, I'll tell you kind of our process normally for identifying projects typically goes through the land manager, right? So anything that we're aware of often comes from the land manager. But I think this is a great opportunity to hear from, you know, members if there is a particular trail or particular area where you've got concerns. You know, I think for efficiency wise, if that you know, comes to kind of a group forum and then you guys as a group come to me with an idea, that's probably the best way to go about it. Our next step would then be to talk with the local land manager, find out if it's a priority for them, and then we need to start looking for funding, right? Because our crews are not free. We have to pay them to be out there and pay to for their vehicles and food and tools and things like that. But then typically what we try to do is work with both the land management agency and other local funders to come up and kind of leverage funding from a couple of different sources to get them out there on the ground. But right now we're getting into our planning season, and grant season starts essentially now, and kind of September through November, December is kind of our busy grant season. So really right now is kind of the ideal time to identify a project, start talking with land managers, and identify some potential funding sources.
That's good to know. And, I'm not presumptuous to say that Colorado Mountain Club has a very good relationship with public land managers on the Western Slope.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly in the Uray district, and from other observations I've had. So we should be thinking now, if there's something that we've seen out there, and say, hey, like if, Brenda, if you're talking about things like, vehicles going off trail, off road, off everything, and getting into wetlands and other bogged down areas, and you can take photos of it and send it through the RIM system, we might could quickly build an argument to let's put boulders in place so that can't happen next year again. So is that true? So would that be a fair set? I mean, I'm hypothetically, I don't know what Brenda was exactly talking about, but is this something that if we really want to hustle, we could affect change?
Yeah, absolutely. There are kind of key areas, and they can be bigger projects too, right? It doesn't have to be one specific spur kind of off of a road. If you say, in general, this entire kind of road or this, drainage sees a lot of off-road use, we want to tackle that. We probably won't be able to get it all done in 1 year necessarily, but we can then again go to the Forest Service, get an understanding for where their priorities might be within that drainage, and start to focus in a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, good idea. Does it, I guess one question, does it have to be in a wilderness area or national forest?
It can be anywhere, and really, I mean, we've primarily done public lands work. We could potentially do private lands work as well if there's a, recreation and conservation interest. And again, we've mostly been working with the Forest Service and the BLM. We've got great relationships with them kind of up and down the West Slope. But if there's a state park or another, local county land manager or something, we're open to working with anyone for sure.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. Great. And if you guys think of, other questions, we can always come back to any of these topics later as well.
Okay.
So I wanted to touch on our Snow Ranger program as well, because it's this hybrid between our advocacy programs related to our backcountry snow sports initiative, but also I think our stewardship programs, because these are actually seasonal staff that we hire to get out on the ground. Their focus tends to be a little bit more on kind of the user education and outreach. They do a lot of patrolling. They also were not writing tickets, but they were kind of an enforcement presence out on the forest in the winter. We just launched this program last year for the first time with the Uray Ranger District. So they were exclusively working off a Red Mountain Pass and the Cimarrons and a little bit on the Uncompahgre Plateau. But again, really focusing on just communicating with users, talking with folks about different regulations, kind of patrolling some of the wilderness boundaries and looking for, snowmobile incursions and stuff like that, doing some signage along those wilderness boundaries to again educate users about where they can and can't go. They're doing some visitor use monitoring and visitor use counts. then working with a lot of partner groups, including the snowmobile groups, Nordic ski groups, a lot of youth and education groups. Yeah, and again, this was kind of the first year that we launched, was the 2019-2020 winter. We're planning to have those guys back out again next year, kind of in the same capacity, and then hopefully potentially expanding this program to other forests in Colorado. There are other, in other places like Vail Pass, the Forest Service kind of staffs a similar type of program internally. We've seen volunteer snow ranger programs in other parts of the state, but not many other places where we've got kind of a nonprofit entity hosting these positions. So, and certainly some areas of need across the state. I think especially this year, with potentially more of the resorts being closed or limited as far as their capacity, we're going to see more and more people just getting out into the backcountry, whether it's in on skis or split boards or snowmobiles. So having that presence out there in the winter is going to be more and more important. But yeah, excited to have those guys back in your neck of the woods again this year.
I see the sign for County Road 5. Has the CMC gotten involved in that plowing dispute with the property owner?
A little bit. So we, some of you might recognize Kelly Ryan. She's in the bottom right of that group picture at the bottom there. She's works with San Juan Mountain Huts. She's an owner there and has been a part of our backcountry snow sports initiative, which is kind of the advocacy arm of our winter work. And I've talked with her a fair amount about the County Road 5 issues, and we've talked to Rock a couple of times about kind of getting involved, and haven't done so formally yet, or just haven't had kind of the right entry point. But we are aware of those discussions, and I think kind of ready to advocate with those folks when the time is right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions on the Snow Rangers? Okay, so the other kind of big component of our conservation work across the state is advocacy related, and this kind of comes to fruition in a lot of different ways. But we're working on everything from localized access issues and conservation issues to state and national legislative issues, and kind of working across the board, really with a recreation lens, right? CMC is a recreation group at its core, and as much as we support wildlife and support forest health, there are other groups that work on conservation issues really specific to those items. When we have a conservation issue come across our desk, we try to put that recreation lens on it and get an understanding for how it impacts the types of recreation that our members engage in. So I'm going to walk through just a couple of projects that we're working on currently that I thought might be of use, but there's a lot of kind of other things that we're continually monitoring and sort of watching as they come across, whether it's oil and gas leasing, or wildlife grazing, or fire and fuels issues. Again, putting a recreation lens on any of those to understand if the project in question is going to impact recreation. So I want to talk quickly about state wildlife areas. I don't know if folks on this call are familiar with a new regulation that was put into place July 1st that now requires anyone who's accessing a state wildlife area to have a valid hunting or fishing license. And it's a new regulation, again, implemented this summer, with the goal of addressing some funding issues that Colorado Parks and Wildlife is facing, and also trying to kind of get a handle on recreation use at some of these properties that were originally purchased for wildlife habitat protection, and for hunting and fishing access. So, you know, the goals kind of behind the program are good from CPW's perspective, and I think, you know, from our perspective in wanting to protect places for wildlife and different types of recreation. But where we kind of have a lot of concerns with the issues is when it comes to the actual implementation and the use of the funding and that sort of things. And I'm not as familiar with the SWAs on the West Slope, but across the Front Range and you know, in my backyard in Salida, a ton of these properties are used for other types of recreation, whether it's hiking, whitewater paddling, bird watching, camping, really pretty prominently, and a lot of times they're even promoted for these types of use, which is great. A lot of them are really accessible. There's a couple of properties right outside Salida. They connect to our local trail system. They provide kind of connectivity and just opportunities, kind of green spaces right outside of town for people to get outside. And so by kind of suddenly imposing this new fee and this new license restriction, there's concerns about, you know, equitable access and sort of how it made this new license may disproportionately impact low-income folks, and how it just sort of changes recreationists' opportunities to access these places or even access adjacent public lands because they're connected through state wildlife areas. So we've been working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We presented at their commission meeting probably close to a month ago now. I actually just had a call, kind of our first big follow-up call with them this morning to really dig into this issue and get a better understanding for how they're going to implement it and how they're going to kind of answer some of these questions on equitable access and recreation access. And where we've gotten to is they have not agreed to rescind the new regulation or pause implementation, unfortunately. So it is a requirement to access these properties still. But what we are looking at now are there particular properties that might be exempt from the regulation moving forward? Or is there actually a regulatory change that we could make to shift the regulation from a fishing license to some sort of other recreation fee? That might be called a wildlife watching license, or it might be more like a state park's parking access fee that's tied to a specific site. So we're exploring all of these opportunities. We're working with a couple of different groups, including American Whitewater, kind of they're working on behalf of the boating community, Great Old Broads for Wilderness, and the Conservation Colorado are all kind of involved pretty heavily in these discussions. So hopefully we'll see some changes. It's not going to be immediate, but potentially as early as next year is kind of what we heard from CPW today, and that we're hoping to shift this regulation so that we have just a better way to generate funds for CPW. And we're not anti-fees or anti kind of pay to play. We understand that they need funding to manage these properties, but we want to see a mechanism that's more equitable and that ensures the funding actually goes back to the issues they're trying to address. Right now, if you buy a fishing license, that money just kind of goes into a big pot and CPW can use it sort of wherever they want to. We want to see those dollars tied back to the specific site that's having recreation issues. We want to see it tied back to really improving wildlife habitat and improving these properties for that purpose. So. But yeah, that's kind of one of the statewide issues that CMC has sort of taken a lead on in the advocacy space. Does anyone have questions on the state wildlife area fee? I think, I don't know if I saw a question pop up in the chat.
Hey, Julie, this is Melanie.
Mm-hmm.
So I was up at Wood Lakes yesterday. That's south of Placerville into the Wiltons. And I was surprised. I've been there just once before, but I was surprised. I mean, it's a national forest campground and a forest campground and a trailhead for multiple trails in the national forest. And there's national forest signs everywhere. The lake is actually the Colorado Parks and Wildlife State Wildlife Area.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was, So I didn't see any notice of this requirement there. Not one. Didn't see anybody policing it. Didn't see, it was like I was there before, only I just noticed the signs were different. So how's it being enforced?
Yep.
Are the actual land managers in the field like saying, wow, this isn't settling right, and so we're not gonna like put our resources into it? What's our reality in the field?
Yeah.
And
we asked that question. Yeah, we asked that question today. And what we've heard is, they're kind of slow rolling the enforcement. The direction to their folks has been, kind of educate people first. So they're not out there trying to write a bunch of tickets right off the bat, which is good. We did hear today that they were supposed to have put up at least temporary signage at all of their sites. But, and I don't know this site specifically, if there are, several different access points, they might have signage at one parking area, but not at another. And I would say, if it's a more kind of remote site or less highly used site, they just maybe haven't gotten to it yet. But they are supposed to be putting up at least temporary signage at all of the sites. And then it's a matter of when their folks are out doing other work, they'll ask people to see their license. I don't think that they're doing really targeted enforcement where they're specifically sending folks, again, especially to the more remote state wildlife areas. They may be doing some of that kind of targeted education and enforcement at the bigger, more popular sites.
It'll be interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. I'll keep moving. Again, if a question comes up later, we can always come back to it. I wanted to talk a little bit about the GMUG, and I imagine you guys are familiar with the Grand Mesa Uncompahgre Gunnison National Forest since it's in your backyard, and hopefully you've been out there recreating. It's a pretty cool forest and really diverse, as you guys know, as far as the landscapes and habitats and ecosystems go. The GMUG is currently going through their forest plan revision process. And if you're not familiar with it, this is basically a high-level kind of 30,000 foot view of all of the programming that happens on the forest. And basically it's a decision-making tool. So any project in the future, in the next 20 to 30 years, is going to refer back to the forest plan to determine whether it's kind of a go or no go. So we're talking everything from a timber sale to a new trail or recreation development project. Oil and gas stuff is going to be handled a little bit differently, but grazing and really any other use of the forest is going to have to kind of go through the vetting of this forest plan. So it's a really big document, really broad, and of course it's on a really big forest. So we've been working since this process started a few years ago with a couple of different groups. There's a conservation kind of coalition of groups that has put together recommendations on new wilderness areas and backcountry areas. And then we've also been working with Outdoor Alliance on a specific recreation kind of vision for the GMUG. And Outdoor Alliance is a coalition of recreation groups nationally. And so you'll see all the logos kind of in the top right-hand corner there are all part of the National Outdoor Alliance group. So we've got representation from the mountain bikers and the rock climbers and the paddlers and the skiers, and as well as a couple of more localized climbing organizations like Colorado Mountain Club and the Mountaineers and the Mazamas. Surf Riders is our newest member organization, and they mainly focus on marine habitat and beach access. They're a pretty cool program to, they don't do a lot of work in Colorado, as you might imagine, but they've got some really great experience. But anyways, Outdoor Alliance has kind of been working on the GMUG and on this forest plan, and working with local stakeholders, so actual, you know, recreation folks that live in and around the forest, to come up with this recreation vision document. And really what that does is it provides policy recommendations and also designation recommendations. So again, some areas that we are collectively, even with mountain bikers and other groups, collectively recommending for wilderness designation, or collectively recommending as a recreation focus area, something that we really want to put a lot of energy and resources and infrastructure into developing recreation so that it remains sustainable in those areas. One of the bigger components that we're working on within the forest plan is the recreation opportunity spectrum. And this is basically a layer that the forest puts over the entire landscape. And they break it up into kind of 5 different levels of recreation. And each of those levels has a different definition that describes the experience you're going to get as a recreationist, the different visitor use levels that you might encounter, different types of infrastructure that you might come across. So if you imagine a primitive setting is going to be just that. It's going to be probably a wilderness area or similar. There's going to be, you know, there may be trails, but they're going to be more primitive feeling. You're not going to see a lot of people when you're out there. The signage is going to be pretty rustic. You're not going to see huge vault toilets and big developed campgrounds and stuff like that. It's going to be pretty primitive. As you get farther up the scale into the more kind of roaded natural and rural settings, that is where you'll see, you know, highly developed recreation infrastructure that you might see at a national park, right? With lots of roads, lots of paved trails, visitors centers, stuff like that. We don't have a ton of rural settings on the GMUG, thankfully, where we have a fair amount of the primitive and semi-primitive settings. But you'll see in the 2 pictures at the bottom of this screen, essentially what the Forest Service does as a mapping exercise to sort of start to map out these areas and assign them to these different recreation opportunity spectrum class settings. So it's getting a little bit into the weeds, but I do think it's important for a group like this because you guys know this landscape much better than I do. In a lot of cases, probably better than the Forest Service does in certain areas. And so to get your feedback on whether these settings are right is really important because, again, this is going to kind of help make decisions down the road, because if something is designated as a semi-primitive non-motorized area, you can't put a motorized trail through there. It doesn't comply with the forest plan, and so you get some of that downstream decision making that might be really helpful for protecting you know, areas that we want to see a little more pristine or you know, free from motorized travel. So this is true for both the summer, which you see on the left, and also for the winter. And again, you guys know that winter travel is very different than summer travel. And on the GMUG, we don't have a ton of restrictions on snowmobile use currently. Obviously, they can't go into wilderness areas, and there are some specific areas that have been kind of designated for non-motorized winter travel. But for the most part, they can kind of go anywhere. So having this recreation opportunity spectrum is sort of the first step in saying, you know what, there are some areas that we want to call semi-primitive non-motorized that really aren't appropriate for snowmobile travel in the winter. They might be adjacent to wilderness, or they may, you know, be particularly, you know, either good for backcountry skiing, or they may be sensitive lynx habitat, or any one of those things. But these ROS settings, I think, are going to become more and more important in the forest planning process. So having you guys be able to provide feedback on items like this is really important. For folks that are on tonight, and I can provide the link to the Outdoor Alliance Recreation Vision, which includes some mapping resources where you can actually go online and kind of toggle back and forth, turn these different layers on and sort of zoom in and see which areas have been recommended for different designations, or, you know, for a recreation opportunity spectrum setting in any given place. So I'll make sure to provide those links when we get off the call tonight. But yeah, happy to. I know that was a lot of information download and a little bit into the nitty gritty of the forest plan. But happy to answer any questions about the GMUG planning process.
When are they wanting to have input on that?
So we're kind of right now, that's a great question. As far as the process goes, we're sort of in an in-between phase. We are waiting for the forest to release their draft plan, and that will be the next kind of opportunity, big opportunity for public comment. We're expecting that probably sometime this winter or early in 2021. Originally it was supposed to come out this fall, but with the timing of the election and other things, it's more than likely gonna get pushed back. But that's something that we'll definitely, you know, kind of alert you guys specifically, since you're on the West Slope. But another good way to stay informed on kind of opportunities for public comment is to sign up for our conservation e-newsletter. You can do that from the conservation page on the CMC site, but we do basically a monthly e-newsletter, and then in those we'll have action alerts. So if there is a comment opportunity, you actually can just go onto our site. We've got, you know, recommended talking points for you to include in your letter, and that letter will go directly to the Forest Service. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions on forest planning?
Hey, Julie, I was just noticing the logos of the top page. We're up there with the Mountaineers, Seattle Mountaineers Access Fund, some but really good names up there.
Yeah.
So how do we come together as a group? That may be too broad to answer tonight, but I'm just wondering if this is kind of a regular partnership, and how we might, when we're facing issues on the West Slope, Western Slope, particularly like with trail access issues or multiple use conflicts. Does this group of folks, how do you interact? How do you have that alliance?
That's a good question. So, you know, Outdoor Alliance is a national organization. So we sit on national kind of policy calls once a week, but then we also have our Outdoor Alliance Colorado kind of subgroup. So we have representation from the Colorado Mountain Bike Association and, you know, different kind of, and Katmobata, Grand Junction, and different local groups and local representatives for those kind of bigger national groups. And they're a great, you know, resource, and I think just kind of networking and connection to share information, and you know, I think we're a, you know, diverse group, and our goals and objectives don't always align perfectly, right? There are some wilderness areas that CMC is going to advocate for really strongly that IMBA just can't get on board with because they have an interest in mountain bike trails, you know, or whatever it might be. But for the most part, I would say 90 to 95% of the time we can be in alignment. So yeah, and I would say, you know, from a more localized perspective, we've just, you know, we've been lucky to build a lot of good relationships with local groups across the state. So if you guys are running into an issue and you know, feel like you need to have a conversation with the local mountain bikers or local paddlers or whoever it might be, let me know, and I can, you know, if you don't have contacts with those groups, I might, or I can certainly track some down for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think it's the last kind of big thing that I wanted to talk with you guys about is our new Recreation Impact Monitoring System, or RIMS. This is a mobile app that CMC launched last year, and it's really, you know, it came out of our stewardship programming. We were sending crews out to remote parts of the state, and a lot of times the land managers didn't even kind of know how to tell our crews what to do out on the ground, right? They hadn't hiked on the trails recently. They didn't know how many trees were down. They didn't know kind of what the major trail maintenance issues were. They just, as land managers, didn't have a ton of information because they might have one recreation manager for 500 miles of trail, right? So they're just overwhelmed and don't have the capacity to get out there and do some of this monitoring work. So we started having our crews collect some of that data, and then realized that through CMC, we've got, you know, access to thousands of volunteers and people who are out hiking and seeing these trails every weekend. So if we could develop a tool to kind of give them something to collect data, take photos, gather information, we'd be able to provide that to the agencies to help with stewardship planning and projects on the ground. So I'll talk about a couple of different components, but we launched the app last year in 2019, so we're just over a year of implementation, and these numbers are actually, they're growing every day. I think we've got over 600 total users, a lot of whom have gone through our training, which is available online. Last year we did a bunch of in-person training, some webinars, and we're getting close. I think we're over 3,000 assessments now at this point. A lot of those were campsite assessments, but we also have trail assessments and visitor use assessments coming in every day. Just from a kind of technology standpoint, really what we're doing when we send people out with the app is collecting geolocation point data. So every assessment, excuse me, is associated with a GPS coordinate, right? So we can put that point on a map and show land managers where the issue is. Once you drop that pin, a user goes through a series of drop-down surveys and answers questions about whatever issue they might be analyzing. You can take photos, and you can use all the features of the app offline, which is important if you're in the backcountry, if you're, you know, in the wilderness and you don't have cell service. You can collect all of this information and sync it back up when you get back into Wi-Fi service. The app is totally free, so if you search CMC RIMS in the Google Play Store or the App Store, you'll be able to find it and download it really quickly. And then the training I mentioned is really key too. We want to make sure people have a good understanding for kind of what they're looking for in the field. So we've got a pretty simple online training that folks can complete, and that sort of opens up all the different types of assessments that you can do. This is just a kind of quick screenshot of what the app looks like once you're into it. So it automatically grabs your GPS coordinates, and then you know, enter basically as much or as little information as is relevant to the issue that you're assessing. So if you come across a downed tree, you don't have to make a note of the tread condition or of any other issues. You're going to just note the downed tree, take a picture of it, and probably within 15 or 20 seconds kind of be on your way again hiking. We do have a camping assessment, and that's a little bit more in depth. So you're looking at a dispersed campsite and taking note of the area of disturbance, the degree of disturbance on the ground, whether the site is located close to water, whether there are other kind of resource impacts or invasive species, that sort of thing. So there's a broad spectrum for kind of what you can use the app to do. And I would encourage you guys, if you have a chance to watch that training, it goes way more in depth than I will tonight. But talks a lot about the different just functionality within the app itself. and then the data that we're trying to collect. We worked really closely with the Forest Service and the BLM to develop these metrics, so that the information we're collecting is information they can actually use to go out and make decisions. They can also compare it to other data that they've been collecting in the past, right? So we're not creating new metrics necessarily. We've just created a different tool to allow volunteers to collect that information more easily. On sort of the back end that most of our volunteer users don't see, we are developing custom dashboards, and that's kind of the land manager access to the information. So we can filter, we're getting data from all over Colorado and actually from other parts of the country as well. We can filter that down just for the URA district so that they're just seeing the information that's coming in about their forest lands, and kind of build out a story that talks about the impacts that they're seeing on the ground, visitor use trends over time. We can create custom graphs and maps and charts for them to, again, sort of get this information that's being updated daily as people are entering new data, and be able to process it and make decisions with it. And then again, our goal is to actually get work done on the ground with this information, right? So the URA Trails group has actually been using this data a lot, kind of in partnership with the forest, but they're going out and they've got, one or two folks that are just hiking and taking note of all the down trees. And then they have a crew that kind of follows up a week or two later and cuts out those down trees. But with the information they have, they know how many trees they are, how big they are, what kind of saw they're going to need, and how long it's going to take them to clear that one trail. So that's kind of the short term, this idea of rapidly responding to information that's coming through the app. But it's also really good for kind of midterm and long-term maintenance projects. So having all of the information that you might need in order to, put together a grant proposal for a project that you want to do next year. Having all the construction notes and sort of the photos and details that you would need to send a crew out there to do a bigger reroute or a bigger, infrastructure project. And then longer term, we hope that really all of this data together will help better just allow the agencies to anticipate maintenance costs, to understand visitor use trends, and to kind of get out in front of these management issues that we're seeing on the ground, so that we don't get to a point where so much resource damage has happened that you can't recover from it, or that it's, the costs are exorbitant because there's been such a big impact. So that's kind of our bigger, longer term goal for the RIMS program. But I would say for folks in this group, right now we're in the place where we are trying to get as many people using the app as we can and collecting data in the field so that we can provide that to land managers and sort of demonstrate the usefulness of the information that's coming in. So if you go, I think I've got it on this last slide here, cmc.org/app. That's kind of our landing page. There are links to download it, and then also links to the online training video. And it's only 20 minutes, so it's pretty quick and easy and fast. But it'll give you a lot more information about, again, the technical features in the app and that sort of thing. Yeah, and again, we're really looking for folks just like you who are out hiking and traveling on these public lands all the time to help us with that data collection. Any questions about RIMS?
Has this been used in other states besides Colorado?
A little bit. So we've got a group in North Carolina that approached us and has been very interested. They've been doing some trail assessments primarily. And again, it's kind of a local volunteer group who's working with the Forest Service out there. We've had, some other just kind of random assessments in the Northwest and California and some other places. Recently, we had a group from Alaska reach out, and they're working with Native communities, again, trying to gather information on their roads and trails system, and also gather information about food harvesting, which is different than what we have in the app currently, but the kind of cool thing about it is we can add new modules and kind of customize them for different uses. So, this kind of wild food harvesting is, I think, really probably pretty unique to these Alaska communities. But we've had other groups approach us about wildlife monitoring or really detailed invasive species monitoring. And any of those things, we basically just come up with a set of metrics, and we can add that to the app. So I think there's a ton of potential, and yeah, I think we'll see it being used more and more. Hopefully in Colorado, obviously that's where our focus is at CMC, and that's where we have the best connections with land managers. But I'm hoping long-term it'll expand beyond that.
Okay. Sounds good.
So Julie,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited about the potential here, and I know that within your district, there's a lot of participation, and that it sounds like not just public land managers, but groups like the Uray Trails group is that they are accessing the information directly too. So it's a communication system going multiple directions. So is there anything that we need to do as a group to increase the communication to public lands managers in the broader districts outside just Uray district? And has within the CMC, there been a discussion since this is all, I don't know, this is only like what, a year and a half old system, of requiring it or encouraging it as leader training, get certified for leaders?
Yeah, that's two great questions. One, so as far as communicating with land managers, we can, certainly always use help in kind of reaching out to folks, and we've got some good connections, but you guys being local, I think makes a huge difference. I mean, the other thing that is really helpful is, again, if you guys are out there collecting data, then we can actually go to a land manager and say, hey, look, we've got 50 data points in your district, or on, in your field office for the BLM, or on this specific trail. What does it look like? How can we kind of help you process this information, and make sure that they're using it? Yeah, so that's definitely super helpful. And then the second part of your question is yes, also. So as far as trip leaders go, that's kind of been our big push this summer and fall, is getting this app into the hands of CMC trip leaders and then members generally. But I think if we can get more and more trip leaders using it, they're going to be able to demonstrate it on their trips and kind of help trickle it through the club. Because of the kind of current state of trip leader training, it happens and looks a little bit differently in each group. It's not part of like the core curriculum at this point, but it is something that we've been talking with trip leaders more, and I think down the road would love to incorporate into that training program. And I don't know, from the West Slope group, if you guys have kind of a trip leader training format that you're planning to follow, but if RIMS is something you'd want to incorporate, I'd be very happy to provide those resources and help facilitate that.
Well, I'd like to say thank you. I mean, I think that this is a really innovative and leading edge thing for the CMC to be doing. And I think it would, in 3 or 5 years from now, we'll all look back and go, wow, look at this. And so I think it's great you share it with places back east, but I'm really excited about the impact on the Western Slope.
For sure.
And I think Robin Cascade is just, she's nuts out there. She's photographing a down tree, this and that, a bridge, erosion, noxious weeds. It's all can get in, and just, ATVs where they're not supposed to be. All these impacts, we don't have to see them alone. And I think that's very exciting. Thank you for whatever you did to make this happen.
Yeah, and one thing I'll note, I need to follow up with some folks out of Grand Junction, but you guys are probably aware of the Palisade Plunge Trail and kind of that new construction that's taking place. They've got some pretty strict monitoring protocols and expectations that they have to meet that kind of went along with the approval for that new trail. And they've reached out about using rims specifically for that. And getting, probably having a custom module that's got their specific questions related to that trail, and having people use it for that purpose. So if that comes together and kind of comes to fruition, that may be another really great opportunity for West Slope folks to kind of get involved. That'd be probably a more, I don't know what the word is, just a more sort of detailed protocol, because they want, specific monitoring on a specific section once a month, or they want visitor use monitoring every Saturday at specific trailheads. So I expect they'll have a really robust data collection protocol, but it could be a really cool use case for rims out there. I'm excited about.
Well, I'm excited about trying it.
Yeah.
I apologize that I haven't yet, but I'm excited about trying it. Yeah. Cool.
Great. Well, we're coming up on our hour. It looks like there were just a couple of questions in the chat box, one about crews working to clear avalanche debris. And yes, our crews have been involved in that. Depending on the location, sometimes AVI debris is so intensive that you need a crew of 20 people out there. But our crews have been chainsaw certified in the past, and then they're almost always crosscut certified. So they have been helping with tons of, whether it's AVI debris or beetle kill, blow down, and that sort of thing. Seems like there's no end to the number of down trees to cut out. And another quick question about the snow rangers, and whether there are opportunities for having them outside of southern Colorado in the Front Range, and that sort of thing. And yes, absolutely, we're working to kind of expand that program and identify the areas where they might be most effective. And then, of course, the second part of that is coming up with the funding for them. That program for the 2 snow rangers realistically costs probably close to 50 grand, 60 grand for a 4 or 5 month season, because of their equipment needs and payroll and safety and training. It's an expensive program to run. Luckily, we've had some good partners with the Forest Service and also with some corporate partners who've been able to provide gear to keep those costs a little bit lower. But yeah, definitely looking forward to having those snow rangers in other program or other places. And one last question about CPW being reimbursed for, CMC leaders being reimbursed for CPW fees. And that's a good question, Linda. I did hear today that if a group has a special use permit to access a state wildlife area, that actually they would be exempt from those license fees. But otherwise, any group, just a CMC trip going to any of these areas would have to pay a per person hunting or fishing license fee. And it's for the whole group, so it's not even just the leader who has to pay the fee. I don't think there has been talk of CMC reimbursing for that at this point. But, yeah. Great. Any other questions I can answer? I know we kind of covered a lot of stuff all over the place tonight, but just wanted to give you guys, again, kind of a snapshot of things that we're working on, and hopefully talk about ones that are a little bit more relevant to you all on the West Slope. But again, we've got tons of programming. One of the best ways to kind of stay informed is to sign up for that conservation e-newsletter on the website. We won't bug you too much, like I said, just about once a month, and we'll have those action alerts and opportunities to get involved. So.